Most people, particularly those in America, can agree that our society and media have become increasingly divided from each other. Hard conversations seem to underline even the most basic interaction nowadays, and our recent election has had no help in that. In particular, climate change is becoming a much more recognizable and discussed issue in a post-Trump victory. Many plead for regulation, citing events like Hurricane Helene and the Spanish flash floods as interludes to more devastating disasters, while others remain adamant in keeping with fossil fuels and extending their reach in society. Here I look to discuss three politically diverse articles focused on the climate issue after the 2024 election. One comes from The New Yorker, one from Fox News, and the last from the BBC. Beginning this conversation requires focus on both sides of the political spectrum before looking into potential common ground. The New Yorker is a historically leftist publication that made their opinion on climate issues in a second Trump term known with Elizabeth Kolbert's article at COP29, The Sun Sets on U.S. Climate Leadership, published just days after the president-elect was declared. This article works to emphasize Trump's plan to remove the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement and how this choice to, quote, drill baby drill will ensure that we blow past the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming that was supposed to be the world's cap. Kolbert's article also works to de-emphasize quality work that has been done already and will continue limiting climate change, and also how a second Trump term is not the nail in the coffin for America's transition to green energy. This work does not mention at all how states themselves can and actively are working to protect their own environments and how the public feels or has responded to this news as well. With all this in mind, it can be noticed that Kolbert's headline remained close to the content but not fully accurate. The COP this year is a setting sun for the current U.S. stance on climate change, at least for now. But given what the article says, the U.S. was never a leader in climate action and instead was one of the highest emitters, second only to China. Without reading the article, misconceptions on the U.S. being a top climate advocate may be developed, as well as readers missing how this is an international issue, extending far beyond America herself. This article, however, is also not immune to employing commonly used phrases like a, quote, huge international effort being needed, and how our opportunity to curb this issue's impact will also soon slip away. While these phrases are scientifically accurate, their overpresence in the media impacts the reputation of Kolbert's article by making it seem like just another doomer piece to add to the pile, with little extra being offered than what is already out there. On the opposite side of the political aisle, there's an article published by the right-wing source Fox News, titled Trump to Install Border Czar to Dismantle Biden Climate Rules Report, and penned by Alex Schimmel. This piece of writing focuses on Trump's plan, and in particular how he will attack Biden's policies, and how he will deliver to the American people what he himself has promised. The article de-emphasizes the way American people speak on climate change in society, as it says it is something that simply just doesn't happen. The article also de-emphasizes what exactly an energy czar is, and that may be something worth digging into. Finally, Fox's publication does not mention at all how this change of pace may impact the environment, the good done by Biden's policies, or what Trump will do when it comes to dealing with the climate internationally, all of which may be worth mentioning. Returning to the headline of this article, it proves to be fairly accurate. Everything laid out in the headline, from the energy czar to the dismantling of Biden's policies, are present within the work. Conversations can be had on the article's political standing, but at least in this case, what is said to be in the article is in the article. Without reading the entire article, though, misconceptions can be formed on what an energy czar is, as well as missing the angle Fox takes about on how average Americans do not consider the climate in their daily life. Before moving on, however, it is worth mentioning that this article does employ common arguments on climate change. The story claims that the average American does not really care about climate change, which is often used but not really true, impacting the article's reputation by showing the author is willing to write what is beneficial to their stance over what is reality. Also in this discussion is the centrist point of view. Many do not subscribe to the right or the left politically, so observing the way a site like BBC speaks on a post-election climate crisis is of relevance. Articles like Matt McGrath's Trump Victory is a Major Setback for Climate Action, experts say, is a good example to use. The work emphasizes short-term risk but not long-term damnation of Earth's climate. It also discusses the strengthening position green energy has in the U.S., while also focusing on Trump's previous term in office. On the other hand, there is less emphasis placed on what Trump seeks to do with U.S. energy other than a drill baby drill attitude, and no insight is given to how the American people themselves feel about or are responding to this development. Much like Schimmel's article, The work of McGrath sticks pretty close to its headline. In fairness, both of these headlines are pretty vague, but the BBC is at least able to cover ideas laid out in the headline and also add to them, as the author notes that this is a setback and not a death sentence for climate action. This means not reading the article would leave the reader without any knowledge on how Trump's impact on the climate may not be as extensive as top story/headlines may say. You might already be able to tell, but the perspectives of all three of these articles are quite unique and different from one another. They all agree that Trump's plans for the U.S.'s use of energy in regards to climate change is wildly different from precedents set by leaders like Obama and Biden. However, these perspectives diverge in how this change will be impactful, as The New Yorker speaks to how this will drastically impact warming rates. Fox News claims this will not be impactful at all as Americans don't focus on climate change, and the BBC says that there may be some difficulties in the short term, but the long-term health of the climate has yet to be decided. The significance of these divergences relates back to each organization's relationship to President-elect Trump and his policies. The people at Fox News have always been sympathetic to Trump's conservative messaging and actions, so they feel like he is doing right by the country. The New Yorker is left-leaning and, as such, is opposed to Trump's approaches to climate change, remaining critical and anxious on what his actions will cause. Both of these publications are different from the BBC, which as an international centrist publication has less of a stake in this story, and so while they analyze what Trump could do to accelerate climate change, they do not write this off as the end of all things, contextualizing what Trump can do and how things are moving beyond his influence instead. The BBC article's focus on Trump's impact not being reflective of long-term impacts is actually fairly uncommon. Most take what he does as setting the standard for the future regardless of affiliation, but saying the future is still unknown is a unique stance to take, leaving the reliability of this article up in the air. But for now, it could be seen as more reliable for taking a chance to say something that no one else considers. Divergence can also be found within the sources or voices selected to be present within each of these three publications, as what or who is given a platform to speak may provide insight into the framing of each work. The BBC work brings in voices like that of Professor Richard Klein of the Stockholm Environment Institute, Dan Eberhardt, who is Executive Officer of Canary LLC, Christina Fiergres of the UN, and even Trump himself. Additionally, citations come from analysis of government acts, the UN, and other articles like one from Reuters. Looking to who is given a voice in Fox's article, we can see more of a platform is provided to those on Trump's side, including Trump transition team leaders like Howard Lutnick or Caroline Leavitt, while also providing citations from news articles mostly from Fox itself, but also one from the New York Times and another from Politico as well. Finally, the left-leaning New Yorker article sees Trump, the CIA, UN affiliates like the UNEP and its workers, news publications like the Washington Post, and a return of Richard Klein from the Stockholm Environmental Institute given a voice to speak. The selection of these voices impact audience understanding because too much of a focus on one side like Trump's transition team or on people like Richard Klein will result in only half of the story being understood and likely creating a greater sense of sympathy or agreement with one side or the other based off of who is given a chance to speak. Our media is full of framing. The right, left, and center all push the same stories in different ways based on their ideology. As seen over the course of this video, you must be careful when consuming news in effort to avoid being unknowingly influenced by a reporter providing only partial bits of the story. Consumers should be aware of publisher leaning, emphasis, perspective used, source selection, reuse of common arguments, and the overall truthfulness of headlines in order to actively be aware when reading current events. In a world full of so much division, especially surrounding issues like climate change and a post-Trump re-election, being at attention is even more important, and framing analysis can help us along with that journey.